Good morning.
Good morning.
How
How
are
are
you
you?
today? I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm great, and I'm reminding you that we are now live. Well, not really live. We're recording.
Wonderful.
Let me just bring everybody else up to snuff. So Hutch and I met thanks to our common friend, everybody's common friend, Ann Stacy from Granbury near Dallas, Texas. And she encouraged Hutch to meet with me. I didn't need any encouragement. And we've already met a few times, and our conversations have been on fire. May I? And
Yes.
we're gonna see what happens now.
I've loved our time together for sure. Really appreciate your time, buddy.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing good. I things are good here in Colorado. It's starting to turn to fall, and so it's one of my favorite times of the year. So it's a good time here. How are things in your
Well,
part of the world?
thank God. Um, we met last week, right?
Yes, sir.
So I think we probably talked about the terror attack that was in my neck of the woods.
We did. How's everybody recovering?
Well, obviously, the woman who was murdered is not recovering. I don't know how much her family is recovering. I went to visit her family. Jewish tradition holds that if somebody dies, then you have a week of mourning and consoling at the person's house. It's colloquially known as sitting Shiva. Shiva, the word Shiva means seven. So it's a 7 day period. It's not really 7 days because the first day is you sit from the time of the burial, so that could be as little as a minute if you complete the burial just a moment before sundown. The last day, you get up just after the morning, because a little bit of a day is considered an entire day, and you don't sit on Sabbath, on Shabbat either. So this 7 days is really closer to like 3.5 days.
Okay.
But I'll cope on. In any case, I went to the home of the woman who was killed. She lives 10-minute drive from me. So I was on my way to my brother, my son, or something like that. And I went in. First of all, there were signs: "Please, no cameras." They're a private family, and there were people all over the place. She had a few daughters, I think, so, and probably some sisters also, brothers, I don't know. So everybody was sitting with their friends around them. The way that you can tell who is being consoled, who is mourning, is two ways. Number one, their shirt is ripped. At a Jewish funeral, you rip the shirt as a sign of mourning, of sadness. Another sign of that is that you have to behave differently. It is prescribed that it's a mitzvah, commandment, that you have to behave differently. So you sit on the floor. I believe in the book of Job, it talks about him sitting on the floor, or maybe the book of Lamentations. In any case, that is the tradition. Some people actually sit on the floor, or maybe on a mat, or on a mattress, but mostly people sit on cut off chairs, so that you can easily see that people are sitting on chairs, but they're lower down. Well, I came in and I went straight to the husband of the deceased, the widower, and some people were talking around and telling stories and stuff. He was just like sitting quietly. She was a very great woman. She was a kindergarten teacher for decades, and so she had thousands of families. And she's one of these teachers a kindergarten teacher. Every family, she was part of their family until this day. Well, I came and just sat for a little bit. I was on my way out, but we'll see. Obviously, her husband wasn't in the car, but the other person who was in the car was my friend's husband. We have somebody here in the neighborhood, somebody from that neighborhood, from that village, who works in our village as the community organizer. So her husband was shot. Some of those, I don't know how many bullets hit him, but 25 bullets were shot at the car. Did you ever? But he survived quite miraculously. He was shot in his legs and in his arms. None of the kishkas, none of the more important, the whatever, you know what I mean.
Major organs, yeah.
The organs, the critical organs. And the amazing thing is that woman, her name was Batsheva. Her daughter, her 6-year-old daughter, was in the car with her, and she wasn't even scratched. 25 bullets, not a single one hit her even.
Wow.
Miracle upon miracle. So again, that was over a week ago, and I obviously wasn't there, but as soon as I saw that it was happening to somebody so close to me, and because I work together with the community organizer when we have stuff sometimes. Anyway, I don't want you should think that it's like this all the time.
No, I understand. I was just reflecting on the 6-year-old girl and how that moment will forever impact her is it's unimaginable, actually.
And the unimaginable thing is that that's not the only one. There is actually an organization called One Family. It's been a while. I don't know if they changed their name or something like that, but I remember when it was founded. It is an organization that is dedicated to making life better for children who are victims of terror. So of course, not every victim of terror was there when their parent was murdered.
Sure.
But that's I wouldn't trade neither of them. Thank you very much.
It sounds like a wonderful organization. Really tough. So if you would, since we're kind of on the topic, I think it'd be helpful for me at least is, you mentioned that you lived in this small village, small town. Talk about, if you can, the community in Israel. And I know you didn't live in the United States too long comparatively to the length of your life, but if you can, maybe draw some comparisons to the unity and the community that you found in Israel versus maybe in other parts of the world.
Compare or contrast?
Yes, both.
Yeah, I grew up in New York, and one story that I like to tell is a few years after I moved to Israel, I was being interviewed to run a camp in a Jewish camp in Cleveland. So they brought me in to interview me, and I came for Shabbat for the weekend, and they were having a kiddush, it's called. After there's probably something like this in churches also. After you finish the church, after you finish the services, everybody comes out and schmoozes. They talk with each other. There's some food, I don't know what that's called in Christianese, but in Jewish it's called a kiddush.
You used another term just now, schmooze, which is a term I use, and I didn't realize that's a Jewish term. So.
Oh yes. Why am I not surprised that you're familiar with the term schmooze?
It's a pretty typical term in business, that's for sure.
Anyway, so I was enjoying myself over there in Cleveland, and I said, "Listen, don't tell anybody in New York about Cleveland, because nobody's going to want to move. Nobody's going to want to bother moving to Israel because you guys are all so nice here in Cleveland." Then a few years later, I went to London for something. Same thing. Very nice people. I said, "Don't tell anybody in New York about London because everybody's going to move to London because it's so much nicer than New York." Then the same thing happened in Florida. I said, "You know what? It might just be New York."
One
So,
common denominator here.
right. Anyway, I like to say that Israel is a family pretending to be a country.
Hmm.
That's really what it is. So again, it's a country. There's 9 million people who live here, but it's such a family. Even again, obviously, where I live, we're all one. Everybody knows everybody, and everybody knows what's going on with everybody. There's one lady over here who's older, and you barely see her. She barely comes out of her house. But she's in her, I don't know, she might be younger than her husband. Her husband is, I think, in his early 80s even. But she's maybe 70, certainly in her late 60s. She just lost her mother. So immediately the whole community gets together to bring food, to see what else they can do, to bring those chairs that I talked to make sure that so it's just and everything clicks because we're like one family.
Yeah.
But it's really like that. I think. I mean, again, I haven't been everywhere. I've barely been anywhere in the world. But I think that the Jewish people is a family pretending to be a people. We originally came from a single family, which was 4,000 years ago, but we have so much in common, especially in contrast to other kinds of people, that we just get together all the time. And again, that doesn't mean that you don't have fights with your family, but in general, it's you're just more comfortable. If I'd go on the subway in New York and I would see another Jew, I would nod at him. And he would nod at me. Okay, I got your back. You know what I mean?
Interesting. So how in Israel, how does the government handle the poor? What's the social system for Israeli? We have the welfare system here, which I have a lot of thoughts about, by the way. But tell me about how you guys handle that in Israel.
Woo! Okay, so Israel started as a socialist country.
Okay.
Whatever that means. What happened is that in the early 20th century, that was when they started the USSR, and they rebelled against the Tsar, and they said, we're going to work according to Marx. Okay, so today, in hindsight, Marx, ridiculous. But in those days, it looked like utopia. So a lot of the Jews who were looking at what was going on in Europe, in Poland, in Russia, wherever they were coming from, they said, this is terrible. It's really bad for Jews over here. So we're going to create a utopia in the land of Israel. And you've heard, of course, of the concept of kibbutz. A kibbutz is a communal village where everybody owns everything and everybody is like one family. In other words, and you even get paid for whatever work you do at the same amount, each according to their abilities, each according to their needs. You don't even get paid the same amount. In other words, if you're the guy in charge of sweeping the factory and you got 9 kids, then you're going to get more money than the boss of the CEO, even though he doesn't have any kids or something like that.
Interesting. Okay.
Yes, that's the way it used to work. After a few decades, it totally fell apart.
Yep.
And now Israel has become a much more capitalist country. But I think the term that they like to use is benevolent capitalism, maybe something like that.
Okay.
So we have some sort of social security over here. We pay in. I don't know how much I pay in. It's taxes. If we get paid, we get taxed a lot over here. So let's say that something like 30% of my whatchamacallit, my my salary stub goes to taxes. So how much of that gets put into an account for me just in case I die early? And so it's social insurance, it's called in here in Israel. Or when I retire, how much is going to go to me? On the other hand, I get another 25, I don't know how much percent that goes into the pot of Israel's government, where they pay for all the things that the government decides they want to pay for, and the 120 members of the parliament decide, okay, we'll vote for that. So you could say, and I happen to lean towards saying, that taxes are a form of theft, But on the other hand, what you don't want roads, you don't want police, you don't want, I don't know, for the city to plant flowers. You want to pay something into the communal pot. So I don't know how the balance is here in Israel. I'm active in the Likud party. The Likud is the leading party of Israel. It's by far the biggest party of Israel, and right now, and usually it's in power. However, a lot of people in the party lean socialist, because when they moved to Israel, most people when their families moved to Israel in the 40s and the 50s, especially in the 50s, they came from countries where they came, barely with the shirt on their back, and so they depended on a social safety net. So it doesn't matter that a lot of them now are millionaires and everything like that, but the idea, and also there are what we call development towns, and they live in the periphery. So they don't live in Tel Aviv, where not everybody, but it's a very rich city. So they say, well, we want to support the periphery. How are you going to support the periphery? That's the political question. But there's two other big things besides the people who live in the periphery, and that is about 20% of Israeli citizens are Arabs, Muslim Arabs, 18%, and about 15% of Israelis are Haredim, which are basically ultra-Orthodox Jews, and they pretty much depends on how you read it. I try to be a non-critical reporter over here, but their value system is different than your normal Westerner. I guess that's the way we should put it. About 70% or 65% of Israelis are Westerners or love the Western values of, hey, let's try to make a lot of money and build up this country and it'll be a great place to live and all that. And about 35% say, listen, we don't really want to work so hard, but we're happy with the handouts.
Yeah.
So that is an issue in politics today in Israel.
You bring up a really interesting point there, and I'd love to, if you're up for this, I'd love to explore it a little bit more. Can you, in the United States, as you know, there's all kinds of different religions that are represented here. Obviously, now you just break it down into what you say, quote unquote, Christianity. There's countless numbers of denominations that creates all kinds of confusion and problems and division. And I mean, the body of believers in the United States, the biggest problem we have is agreeing on anything, right?
I'm just going to interrupt you and say I'd love to come back to that and talk about it.
Okay. So, but I want to put it back in your camp a little bit. Can you help me to understand? So you have, obviously you're a practicing Orthodox Jew. You just mentioned a different sect of Judaism. I don't know if that's the proper term. Can you talk to me about the different sects of Judaism and maybe some of the high level differences between those?
I'll try in 60 seconds. No. Again, I'm telling you the way that I read history and sociology today. I don't think that I'm too far away from the conventional wisdom. So up until about 200 years ago, everybody in the world, but including Jews, they were on their own. There was no Facebook and there was barely a newspaper, and you lived in what was called your shtetl, your little town. And if you went a few hundred, if you got into the horse and buggy and you had enough money from selling milk to be able to go to a town a few hundred miles away, that was already something you would talk about to your grandchildren, right? So everybody lived alone, lived together like that, and it was like a fence between that Jewish shtetl and everyone else. Living in Europe, you had the Cossacks and all sorts of, so you didn't want to have anything to do with them, and they didn't want to have anything to do with you, and everything was okay. Right? But about 200 years ago, I think the name Napoleon comes in here a little bit. They decided to liberate all of Europe, and everybody's allowed to be everywhere now. Now everybody's going to be a citizen. So the Jews really jumped on that, and they said, "Wait a second, you mean I don't have to listen to my father anymore? Basically, I can go out and get myself a job. I can maybe make my own fortune and stuff like that. And wait a second, now I can start meeting with those Christians, and they seem to be the guys who have all the money. Maybe I'll just become a Christian, So have you ever seen the movie Fiddler on the Roof?
Yes.
Yeah. So that, again, was it really like that? Maybe a little bit of a caricature, but that's what it was. People said, "Listen, we want to break out of the ghetto, and that's where we're going to go." So a lot of the Jews left, and the people who were staying, they said, "No, you have to continue and observe the Torah. And if you leave, then that's it." Just like Tevye the milkman said, "I don't have a daughter anymore." But that didn't happen to everybody. And then somebody said, "Wait a second, how about we don't become Christians? We stay Jewish, but we get rid of all of the difficult stuff." And that was called reform. So it was basically someone. I'm saying this now, and I hope I don't get we're being recorded over here. But it was liberal Christianity without Jesus.
Okay.
They played the organ in this. There's no such thing as playing an organ on Shabbat. You're not allowed to do that. They drove to the synagogue. None of this stuff. And what was most important for them was interacting with their Christian colleagues at work, And then in the middle, somebody said, "You know what? That's too far away. But that Orthodox stuff is also too far away. So we'll create something in the middle. We'll call it conservative. We're trying to conserve compared to the reform." So those were the three main branches of Judaism, mostly in the United States. I'm talking about. Reform was very big because, hey, it's like all the taste, none of the calories, and everybody looked at the Orthodox because, here I am sitting at home on Shabbat, and in those days, in the 50s and the 40s, if you didn't come into work on Saturday, don't bother coming in on Sunday. Mm-hmm. So people left Orthodox Judaism in masses.
Interesting.
But then in the 60s and the 70s, they started getting a little bit stronger, the Orthodox. And ultimately, let's put it this way. You can be a modern Orthodox Jew, like me, let's say, and feel like not only feel like you're following all of the traditions, all of the rules of Judaism, yet you are a man of the world. So again, there's arguments in between, exactly how much and what are you allowed to do. Those are little tiny arguments. However, there was another group that said, wait a second, this is too modern for us. We want the same thing our great-great-grandparents had. If it was good enough for them, it's even good enough for us. And so there you go. That's pretty much your four major divisions in Judaism, but we're missing the biggest division. The biggest division in the United States Jewry is unaffiliated.
Oh, okay. Tell me.
They're the ones that they don't go to church, they don't go to synagogue, they don't do anything. Their grandmother was Jewish, but what do they know from Judaism? Nothing. They know from Judaism what they see in an Adam Sandler movie. That's about it. And they're the biggest, of course, because America is freedom.
Yep.
And if my great-grandma, here, I'll tell you my own family, my wife's family. My wife's family, her great-grandfather, he lived in the early 20th century. He was Orthodox. His kids already weren't Orthodox. His granddaughter didn't even know from Orthodox. And she just by coincidence married another Jew. But her nephews, nieces, cousins, I think I'll play it safe, about a 50% intermarriage rate amongst Jews in the United States.
Okay.
Which means, again, I'll simplify it, which means that some Jews, if you intermarry, then your kids aren't Jewish. I don't care if you have a menorah next to the Christmas tree.
Yep.
You need both parents to be, you need a mother, it's matrilineal descent. I won't get into the details. Bottom line is, so one year I was in America, and I took a job as a teacher in a Jewish after-school program, and in a conservative synagogue. And the principal of that school said, "Listen, Gidon, here's how you're going to figure it out. The ones with the Jewish names, they're not Jewish. The ones with the non-Jewish names, they're Jewish. Why is that? Because of what's called matrilineal descent. In other words, it's the mother that passes down the Jewish gene. So if my daughter, who's Jewish, I'm Jewish, my wife's Jewish, my daughter's Jewish, if she would marry a non-Jew, my daughter, then her children would be Jewish. They probably wouldn't be very Jewish, but they're Jews. Yeah. But if my son, who would take my name, and he would go and marry a non-Jew, I don't care if they do all the holidays and everything. Religiously, she's not the kid. My grandchildren aren't Jewish. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So that's and it's one thing to say, well, we're also Jews and we don't follow that law, so you can't say we're not Jewish. But even if you don't go with the laws, the Jews are evaporating in the United States. And in a way, Christians are also evaporating, maybe even more so. Agreed. Because what's a Christian? Wait a second. It's a Christian country, so I can just do whatever I want. Oh, I don't feel like going to that church. Really? What do I have to go to church for? I mean, once a year, I'll put up I'll go look for Easter eggs, I have to tell you what your problem.
Yeah. It's fun. It's interesting that you say that because, one of the things I do, Guido, and I think I've explained this to you, but maybe for the people that are watching, one of the things I do is I disciple and I mentor executive CEOs in the marketplace. And, one of the things as a former executive myself, one of the things I saw as a man of faith is a big disconnect between my faith and what I believed in, and then actually what I did every day from 8 to 5, right? And how do you take those two things And, we're not called to be followers of Christ as a Christian. We're not called to be followers of Christ just on Sundays or whenever we go to church. It's supposed to be in all aspects of our lives. And so what my ministry is really about is helping these men, what I call them as kings in today's culture, how they can begin to understand, their priesthood. And so how can we begin to merge these two things together? And one of the things you mentioned, being a Christian country, one of the things I challenge is a lot of my executives will say, we're a Christian company. And I said, that's impossible. A company can't be a Christian. Now, it can be run by Christian values and principles, but just because you label, one of the jokes that we have here is, just because we put the ichthus, on our business card does not make you a Christian company. As a matter of fact, I would encourage most Christians that are doing that to take it off their card or take it off their business website or whatever, because most followers of Christ that are running companies in America today don't run it with the principles and values that the Bible teach. And so we're actually a really poor witness to what Scripture says, sadly. But so anyway, just to your point, the idea that just because I label myself a Christian country or I label myself a Christian company doesn't make us a Christian country or company.
It could be just the opposite. Well, not the opposite, but it could make it. I'm proposing that it makes it harder to be a Christian because everybody's a Christian. So I'm also a Christian. I'll just go with the flow. If everybody is on this escalator, so am I. So all right, so I'm on the escalator. Well,
yeah.
What else am I supposed to do?
What I'm seeing though is in these days, what I'm seeing is that there's a greater separation now than ever before in my lifetime, and I'm beginning to see a light is becoming light and dark is becoming dark, and the gray areas are starting to wash out more in our culture, and people are being forced to really make a decision on where they stand on topics because those topics have become so mainstream, or at least the feeling is they're much more mainstream than they've ever been before. And now people are being forced to make a decision on where do I fall, where do I stand on certain issues and certain topics. And so that's what I mean by the light is coming on and the darkness is really being exposed in a much more significant way. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Are you seeing that?
I think so. Look, it seems to me that the one of the big issues, let's say, is abortion, right? That seems to be a big issue that I would say that most Christians are very squarely on the anti-abortion side. Now,
you'd be surprised.
Yeah, but just for the sake of this conversation here, I'm not in America. I mean, I'm an American, but I don't live in America, and there's a lot of other issues in Israel. So the topic of abortion, even though it might actually be bigger than the topic than in America, I don't have the statistics at my fingertips. But it's just not a topic that I feel that I have to weigh in on, or go up on. That's not the topic that I'm going to go on the barricades for. So I could see a lot of people in the middle talking about what you say, that the darkness, the light, the gray, saying, "Listen, I'm not getting an abortion. I mean, Bemet, they got an abortion. What am I going to say? Listen, you're a sinner. Listen, I'm not going to let you into my car when we drive to paradise." I'm just saying, for a person who might not be from your perspective, from your thought process, not just your thought process, but the thought process of Christians that I see in real Christians in popular culture, Christianity Magazine, Christianity, whatever. Listen, just don't bother me with that.
Yeah.
And how can you blame them?
Yep.
So when you say the Christians aren't really doing the Christian values stuff, so then, all right, so who's to say? I feel Jesus in my heart. I try to pray a lot, try to hear what's going on. But I think that basically live and let live. Maybe that's the religion, the faith of some Christians. Say, listen, I believe in Jesus. I ask myself from time to time, WWJD, and the rest of the time I try to be a nice person.
Yep. And therein lies a challenge, right? Is how do we live out our faith every day? And what does that look like? We just had you and I spoke about this a little bit the last time we were together. We just had what I call I stay away from the word conference because that just conjures up a thought. We had a gathering here in Colorado. It was called the Remnant Gathering, and it was designed to bring together believers, followers of Christ from all over the world, actually. And we had about 200 people that were there. And then we had panelists that we flew in from all over the world as well, many from Israel, David Krutman, which I know you're friends with. And he came to represent the Orthodox Jewish perspective, which was fascinating and wonderful. And it was just an extension of the conversation you and I are having here. But the real push behind the gathering really was to say, okay, in these days that we're living in, I'm not going to suggest these are the last days or the end times or whatever. It wasn't about an end time conference. This is really talking about in these days that we've been given. What I can tell you is I'm in my last days. I'm definitely in the last couple laps of my life, and so I can tell you that. So in these last days, what can we do? What can we do to advance the kingdom of God? What have we been equipped with? What platform has God given us? What giftings, anointings has God placed upon us? How can we wake up to those things and then begin to actually very intentionally walk it out every single day as it relates to things like, one of the topics we discussed was the church and politics. What role should the church play in politics? There's a lot of people say that the church should completely stay out of politics altogether. There's others that are on the other end of that spectrum that say, no, we need to be preaching from our pulpits, policy and what scripture says about certain issues as it relates to government policies, and not just saying that, but taking it a step further, whether it's running for office or trying to be an influence on our local representatives or our senators or whatever, to try to influence decision making at the highest level that impacts laws and all the things that govern the land. And so where's the line? How do we do that? What do we do? And one of the things we talked about is this, and maybe you can relate to this, Gidon, is one of the prevailing mindsets of an American right now is just how legitimate is the election, right? So one of the ways we can act.
Wait. Just how legitimate is the election?
The election process. Is my vote really being counted? Is it being manipulated? It's all that. I don't know how much you've been following that in the last election. That was a big deal. That's one of the reasons why, former President Trump has been indicted, is for what they believe is tampering of that process. Right. And so it's a big issue in the United States right now, is people believing in the election system, which is the foundation, right, of a democracy.
Must be.
That if that falls apart, you don't have much of a democracy anymore. So the point I'm trying to make is, one way that we can impact policy is how we vote. I'm going to vote a person into office that is hopefully in alignment with my beliefs and my values.
Of course.
So let's just start there and say, if you don't believe that the election process is pure and is, then that challenges that approach, right? And now you feel hopeless and helpless that, it doesn't even matter what I vote now. It's just going to be manipulated anyway, like it is in so many other countries, right? So that creates problems and that creates doubt. So if the vote isn't the only way, what are other ways that we can impact our culture as it relates to policy? And you brought up abortion, which is a great topic to discuss, because the complexity behind the laws around abortion is great. It's not only been now lessened, at least on a federal level, with the overturn of Roe versus Wade. and it's placed more of that responsibility down into the states. And now the states are wrestling over this, trying to figure out what portions of abortion are we going to allow, at what point is it illegal, and you have policy all across the board on that, all across all 50 states. So there's frustration in the complexity for an average citizen, follower of Christ, as it relates to how can I impact that. And so I could run for office. Well, not everybody's cut out to run for office, and they don't want to go through that process. So what can I do? Again, back to the basic, boiling it down on a day-to-day basis. What can I, as a follower of God, what can I do to impact this issue that is important to me, i.e. abortion? And so one of the things we did for our participants at this gathering is we had those discussions, but then we also had some very grassroots initiatives / ministries that were represented at our gathering. One, for example, was called Alternatives. And what Alternatives is all about, it's a wonderful ministry here in the States. And what they do is they are for lack of a better term, they're a counseling center that women that are considering this decision, am I going to have the child, keep it? Am I going to have the child, put it up for adoption, or am I going to abort the baby? Women that find themselves in that predicament, they have an alternative now that they can go to this center that's Christ-based, by the way, that counselors sit down with these women to help them work through this process, this decision-making process, to hopefully convince them that if they don't want the child themselves, that adoption is a beautiful way to bless another family, bless this child, all the things that go along with that.
Okay.
So my point being is, we may not be able to impact policy and remove abortion as an option, but we can impact the life of that individual mother and that individual child. There's a story that maybe you've heard, Gidon, about a little boy after a major storm. He goes out on the beach one morning and he's walking along the beach and he sees all these starfish that have washed up on shore during the storm, and they're dying on the beach. There's thousands of them. And this little boy is walking down the beach and he would pick up a starfish and he would throw that one back in the water. And he'd walk a little further and pick up another one and throw it back in the water. And a person is walking down the beach and sees this little boy doing this and says, "What are you doing? There's thousands of starfish on this beach and they're all dying. Are you really making a difference?" And the boy picks up another starfish and he says, "Oh, it makes a difference to this one."
This one, right?
And he throws it back in the water. And that's kind of the point, that we're trying to make here is, even though we may not be able to change policy as it relates to abortion across the board to save hundreds of thousands of children's lives, we can make a difference in one at a time. So don't allow the issue to overwhelm you and say, what's in my power? What's in my ability to make an impact on this issue? And we all have it within us to be able to do that. And so that's kind of what we were focusing in on, is both the high macro view of it, but also the micro and what can we do as individuals.
Fantastic.
So that's just an example of some things that we did at this gathering recently.
So here in Israel, it's a much smaller country. I mean, our whole country is smaller than probably a few dozen cities.
Jersey. I think New Jersey is the comparison.
Yeah, that's the size-wise, but as far as the number of people, it's a different story completely.
Yeah.
And I realized that I could become a member of the biggest political party. I wouldn't be the prime minister, and I wouldn't be a congressman, a member of the Knesset, but I would be a member of the electing body that elects the members to the Knesset. Again, it's a little bit complex. When somebody runs, let's say, for the Congress, then it's the party committee that decides who's going to be their candidate. So in Israel, for the Knesset, you run on a list. So if you're number 14 on the list, and the party gets enough votes to get 20 people in, then you're in. But how do you get to be number 14 on the list? Then the membership of the party, especially the central committee, has a lot of impact on that. And throughout and if you want to get reelected, then you have to be connected with with each one of these people. So there's 3,000. Pardon me?
I was going to say that's where the schmoozing happens, right there.
Exactly.
Schmoozing happens. Yep.
Next, in 2 weeks, is Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, the Jewish New Year. One of the beautiful things about Israel is that we run this secular country according to this religious Jewish calendar. So you don't have to be religious in order to say, "Hey, Happy New Year." Anyway, a week and 2 weeks before this holiday, all the politicians are running all around the country and inviting all of us activists come for a l'chaim, for a haramat kosit, for a, how do you say that? L'chaim is, it's a, let's all say hello basically and have a little drink of wine. We're not drinking liquor. What do you call it?
A little meet and greet.
Meet and greet, yeah, at least once a year. And then during Passover, that's another chance. And if I have a birthday, then I get a lot of calls from a lot of members of the Knesset. They all want to me. But it's a small country. It doesn't take much to get that if that's the kind of thing that you're into. Now again, I have to be a little bit more active because I'm on the Central Committee. But how did I get onto the Central Committee? Because I signed people up for the party, who then voted me in to be in the Central Committee. So I tell them, listen, you don't have to be in the Central Committee, just support me. If you think that I'm an okay guy that reflects your values, do me a favor. And so that's the way it happens. And so that's the way it works here in Israel. I'm sure, more or less, that's the way it works in the United States as well. In other words, you say, oh, I don't have time to be a politician. Okay, but your neighbor here, you like him. He's a nice guy. He's trying to be a politician. So ask, what did you do? Give me, donate, contribute to my war chest, to my party. Okay, here's $50, $100, whatever it is. Okay, every little bit counts. More than somebody else who didn't do anything.
Yeah.
So that's on the whatchamacallit, on the political side. But there are a lot of nonprofit organizations like that alternative organization that you mentioned in the United States. We have one here in Israel called Efrat. And in English, it's because they raise money also in the States, in English language countries, it's called CRIB. It's something for not keeping, it's with a C, something Israel's babies. I don't remember what it is now. CRIB. And in Hebrew, it's called Efrat. I don't remember why it's called it, but they're doing that. They're saving tens of thousands of babies a year. So and if I like that, if that's a value that I want to have bandwidth for, then I'll give them some money. I'll call them and say, what can I do? I'll come to an event. I'll bring my neighbors to the event. Maybe I'll host it. The nonprofit organizations, the non-government organizations, that's the way to move your values.
Yeah.
To move the needle on your values.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think just the real takeaway that I wanted to bring up on that is, even though, and maybe this is encouragement to everybody that's listening or watching, is that even though, you may just be that small person out there that doesn't have a ton of influence or have a major platform to operate from like Gidon does. There are ways that you can advance the kingdom that are just as powerful as those big policymakers out there, right? I think one day when we sit before the Lord, it's the parable of the talents. He's going to look and see what I've given each person, and for that they're going to be held accountable. And for those that he's given great influence and affluence and money, they're going to be required more. There's going to be more that's going to be required of those that have less. And so the neat thing about that is the reward for each is exactly the same. It's not as though I gave you more, so therefore I'm going to give you more. It's the reward for being faithful and obedient to the things for which I've given you, the talents and the giftings that I've given you and the anointing. That's what you're going to be held accountable for. And so that that mother out there that's working at home, that is busy just trying to keep the family afloat. She's not, maybe doesn't have the major influence and platform that a CEO of a massive company would have, or a legislator within the Knesset or here in our government. But at the end of the day, she's going to be held accountable for what God's given her, just like that other individual is. And so I just want to encourage everybody, and that's part of what the Remnant Gathering was about, is just use what it is that God's given you and use it to the best and the fullest that you possibly can to advance the kingdom in the ways that he's placed upon your heart. And that'll make for a much better world this side of eternity.
I think that's very good that you're saying that, because what is the point of life? Is it for me to get as many brownie points as I can, or is it for me to help to try to make this world a better place than I found it?
That's right. That's right. Well, my brother, it's been great to talk to you today. I'm excited to continue our conversation. Next time we talk, maybe we can get to the topic of the interview that you sent me that you were a part of. That was fascinating to me, and I'd love to talk more about that, but we'll see where things take us.
I'll be happy. I'll just let's run a little ground rules over here. When I'm talking a little bit too long, then just raise your finger or something like that. So I'll bring it down, move on to the next topic.
No, you're good, man. I appreciate you, brother.
Thank you very, very much.
You're
in Colorado, you said, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I think I told you I'm coming to the States in October.
Okay, let's see if we can rearrange things to connect, okay?
We'll work on that.
Okay, brother. Love you, man.
Shalom, shalom.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.